Opinions stated by anyone in this podcast should not be used as evidence. Assume that relevant and reliable evidence cited during this discussion can be found in the related Candor Briefs releases. Thank you. Hey, and welcome to the Former Partners podcast. My name is Quentin Cooper. I'm a former debater. I started Candor Briefs just a few months ago, and this is part of it.
My name is Lucas Monroe. I'm also a former debater from Carthage High School. Quentin and I were partners back when we were in high school, and now I'm on this podcast.
And that's why it's called Former Partners
Podcast.
Pretty clever stuff we got going here. So what we're talking about today is the November-December topic about pharmaceutical price controls. The idea behind this is we're just going to give topic analysis. We're going to talk about argumentation, different evidence. And as it was said in the intro, our opinions shouldn't be used as evidence, but anything that we do cite can be found in the Candor Briefs releases related to this. So if you're interested in anything, let us know.
With that being said, never undervalue the logical arguments.
Yeah, logical arguments themselves are phenomenal. Not everything you say needs to have evidence. If it's something that, a high school student shouldn't know about, you should probably have evidence to back it up. But logic is something that everybody has, so.
And we'll get into some of those fallacies later in the podcast.
Absolutely. One of the first things we wanted to talk about, just under the simple topic analysis, is what the pro side argues versus what the con side argues. One thing I noticed is that pro is pretty much just about affordability for medications. Would you agree?
For the most part, yeah. There can be something said about the relationship between government controlling businesses and not, but it is mostly about economics.
Yeah, I mean, all the pro evidence is almost just heartstrings about it's about these people can't afford medications and they are dying, and look at this awful disease they have and they can't buy it to make them better, which is that's a valid argument, but it's all about, that's the pro side in general, is just affordability. Now, of course, there are arguments outside of that, but that's a majority of them, it's about affordability. Conversely, on the con side, it's a lot about innovation. That's what, everybody that argues against price controls says if they don't have profit, they can't innovate anymore, which I don't know if I necessarily agree with.
Unfortunately, it's not necessarily about if we agree or not, because in a debate round, it's about what the evidence is. Now, I also don't know if I agree or not. If you look to historical examples like Louis Pasteur, the man who invented the polio vaccine, he sold it for free. And it is shown by many different economic analysts that had he actually put a price on it, pretty much any price, he would have been the richest man in history. So something to consider when you're looking at these topics. What kind of good can it do versus how much is it worth putting in someone's pocket?
Shout out to Louis, no doubt.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks, man.
Wheelchairs would have been a lot more prevalent if that hadn't happened.
I appreciate it, Louis. A couple things to consider on this topic on the individual side. First, on pro, don't run a plan. It's so hard not to. There's so many good examples of how this works, how it's worked elsewhere. I don't know if I'll say how it's worked elsewhere, but how it is used elsewhere. And it's difficult to not show, hey, we could do this exactly and make it happen. But you got to stay away from that. It's a super thin line on this topic, and you got to be careful about it. Which we'll talk more in a little bit about how to give examples and not turn it into a plan text.
And for the students out there, especially the public forum students listening, it's going to be really easy just to ask your coaches about what creating an actor and what having an action is and how that is specific to policy debate rather than to public forum debate. It's very easy to avoid, and you can still make just as strong a points as though you were running a plan, but without actually running a plan.
Yeah, and the actor or the agent is who does it, The action is what is being done. It's all pretty simple stuff. And you have to hit a couple different marks to make it a plan, but you really just don't even want to get close to it. It can turn a good debate into a rule book debate, and that's just never fun.
It's not fun for you, and it's definitely not fun for the judges.
Yeah, they don't want to talk about the rules, especially if it's some poor kid's mom that just got roped into it. One thing to consider on the con side is that, like we were talking about, the pro arguments are heartstring through and through. It's about sick people not being able to get their medications. So on the con side, I don't know how else to say this, try not to sound rude and mean. I'd say everybody knows someone that's had trouble affording medication before, no matter what it is, healthcare in general. And there is a fine line between arguing for innovation and arguing for the rights of these companies and not sounding mean, like you don't care about people.
Just as a quick retroactive butt saving, it was actually Jonas Salk that made the polio vaccine.
Oh, no.
Louis Pasteur was the developer of the anthrax vaccine.
Oh, my God.
Dearest apologies.
We can't do this podcast anymore.
I think we'll be all right.
Nobody's going to believe us ever again.
I mean, I corrected myself, which is better than somebody jumping on the contests and the comments, and saying, actually, so.
What was his name?
Jonas Salk was the one who made the polio vaccine.
Shout out him, too. I mean, anthrax is bad, too, so
yeah, and
it's all... Shout out to both of them.
Well, and I thought it sounded wrong because Pasteur was actually pasteurization and anthrax vaccine, which really don't seem to relate to each other. But I guess
I don't know enough about either of them to have an opinion.
It's microchemistry, which is not what we're here to talk about today, although it would be interesting. But back to pharmaceuticals and price controls.
Yeah, I mean, either way, I appreciate them both. So let's talk a little bit about topic in general. How are drug prices determined? In the brief, there was a little section on this, just for some explanation. And the short answer is it's very complicated, but we can give some insight to it. So essentially, when a pharmaceutical industry develops a new drug, they have to figure out what they have in it. So they consider what it costs to make the chemical and the compound. So there's development costs, salaries of everybody that worked on it, the cost of the trials, etc., for that baseline cost. And then they have to consider the clinical value. Is it going to help people live longer? Is it going to help people live better? How does it compare to other similar drugs? Are there other drugs? And if there are, will the consumers buy this new one instead? Etc. How many people will it be marketed to? That kind of thing.
It's really not all that different from developing any sort of other product, except that they have a lot more hoops to jump through in terms of the safety sides of things. And I mean, when you're talking about things like automobiles or electronics that are developed, those even have their own safety things they have to run through, but obviously medications are going to be a lot more.
Yeah. One huge thing is the FDA.
Exactly.
You have to pay a lot of money to make a new medicine. So all these things considered, they have that baseline. Essentially, this is what we have to sell the drug for to break even. Now, obviously, they're not going to want to break even. They want to make money. It makes sense. You start a business to make some money. So after they decide that baseline price, wholesalers and what's called BPMs, or not BPMs, PBMs, pharmaceutical benefit managers, they negotiate for lower prices for their insurance companies. So essentially, there are 3 steps. There's the industry that makes the drug, and then there is the PBM, and then there's everybody under the PBM, insurance companies, consumers, that kind of thing. So let's say a company needs to sell each pill, let's say, for 50 cents to break even just on the cost to make it. So they set the list price at like $10 to make profit on it. The pharmaceutical benefit manager will negotiate it down to a discounted $8, since they're going to be buying more than pretty much buying in bulk. Now that person sells it to the insurance company for $8, but the insurance company only wants to pay $6 for it. And that's where the consumer pays that $2 copay. So that's how everything is priced, and that's how the cost ends up on the consumer. That's a pretty basic overview of it. Like I said, it's a lot more complicated than that. It's not that simple, but that's the best way to look at it.
Well, looking at it that way, you can really easily see how we get into some of these ridiculous cases where cancer drugs are costing hundreds and thousands of dollars a dose almost, because one company comes up with one cancer drug that actually works, and they don't bend on the price. They set the price so high that people can barely afford it. And that's where we really get the affirmative side of things. They just refuse to negotiate with the PBMs, I believe, pharmaceutical benefit managers.
Yeah.
Yes, they refuse to negotiate with the PBMs, and they just keep selling it across until finally the person who has to eat all of the cost of the pill is the consumer and not the company or the PBM.
Right. And of course, if you don't have insurance, 2 steps of that are gone, and you're paying full list price.
Straight from the company, essentially.
Yeah. I think technically from a wholesaler, but you skip steps that make it cheaper. So for those people that don't have any insurance or anything like that, they pay way more than that $2 copay, which really, it can be a lot for them, because it's not just $10. It's in some cases thousands. So now kind of what we wanted to do was look at some case ideas, look at some actual arguments themselves. And Luke's and I, since, we were partners in high school, I was a first speaker. Luke's was a second speaker.
That is correct.
That is correct. I remember. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read just a short overview of a pro case. And then we're going to discuss how Lucas, as a second speaker, would respond to that. So this overview of a pro case, it's sort of it's a morality and utilitarianism case. So the first observation of the resolution is the word should in the resolution implies a moral obligation. There's a good definition by Cynthia Blumenthal that says should, when used as an auxiliary verb, expresses a conditional or contingent act or state or moral obligation. So what this shows is it just tells the judge, hey, when you're judging this round, the resolution implies a moral obligation, so think of it in a morality sense. The framework is obviously something that you can change, you can debate on the framework itself. This is just the framework I laid out in this case.
Now, within that same definition, don't underplay the conditional or contingent act or state part of it, because when you're talking about, in this resolution where it says the United States federal government should, you can actually be talking about how it's contingent upon the United States federal government to do these types of things. So it is the government, therefore they should do X, which is, in this case, regulating pharmaceutical industry prices.
Right.
But you can definitely come at it from a moral obligation angle, and it's what I would also recommend on the affirmative side of things. It's going to be a really good way to make discussion happen in a good place.
Right. It gives you that opportunity to talk about the moral side. Because like we talked about, again, the pro side is very heartstrings. So the second observation of the resolution brings in utilitarianism, which is essentially the idea that the best action or decision in a situation is the one that brings the most advantages to the most people. So already within maybe 30 seconds, you've told the judge, vote on what you think is the moral decision. And if we're talking about morality, the best decision is the one that creates the most advantages for the most people. So it's a pretty good starting point for the pro side.
Now, some of you might be missing what the purpose of doing these two things is, if you're new to the debate especially, and it's totally understandable. What you're trying to do here is you're trying to frame the resolution for the judge. You're essentially lending them a scope into the round so that they can look at specific things and actually have things to judge and weigh your impacts and your arguments on. Without this framing, it kind of makes the match into a potential hodgepodge of whatever both sides decide to bring up, and makes it to where everything should be valued equally or just left up to the discretion of the judge even. And that's just too many variables for you as somebody who is trying to ultimately be successful in these events to allow it to happen, you really need to whittle it down to a framework so that you can control the round a little bit more.
Right. And if you don't, I didn't consider that, some people don't understand framework sometimes. Just because it's been every debate we ever did after a certain point, probably after sophomore year, we laid framework.
It's so important. It just tells the judge what you're going to talk about, and then you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them about. And it's just the best way to go into these things. And that is that's a direct quote from Brian White, the Carthage High School speech and debate coach. He taught us that on day one, and it was correct.
From White. Framework is so important. It's a good way to already get the judge on your side, especially if you lay out that framework in the first speech like you're supposed to. It tells the judge, hey, this is the scope. Anything outside of this doesn't really matter or shouldn't matter. And sometimes that'll turn into a debate itself. And some of the funnest debates that we've had, I think, were about framework.
Yeah, because obviously the negative team in any public forum resolution has a lot of ground to cover, because they just have to negate whatever the affirmative team brings to the table, which is not easy, especially because public forum allows the negative team to go first on certain occasions.
Which is wild, but I love it, dude. Okay, so jumping into this case, I'm going to get you a pen.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Also, while he's getting me that pen, be careful of abusive framework, because it is totally a thing. At the same time that giving one or two observations with definitions can apply a good framework to a round, putting your opponent or yourself in a box that is too limited for a scope is just as dangerous as not putting a scope on the round at all. So really, you're just going to have to practice rounds, and you're going to have to feel out that balance of when you feel like you've brought enough different topics into the resolution to discuss to have good debate, but not so many that you're just overwhelming yourself and the judge.
Right. Your framework shouldn't be already starting to attack the other side.
Absolutely not. Because then if you set up a framework that doesn't even allow them to bring certain arguments to the table, that's abusive.
It's super abusive.
Yeah, you're opening a can of worms that's going to get you to lose rounds before you even get a chance to read your case.
Yeah. If you do that and the other team points it out, that's already a tick against you. So you want it to be a fair debate. So framework is just a really good way to get everybody on the same page. So now that we have framework understood, what it is, how to use it, in this instance of this case that I'm reading now, the idea is that the resolution implies morality, and the way the judge should weigh the resolution and the debate itself is essentially who brings the most advantages to the most people. That's the framework I've set up for this case. The other team can argue against that, but for my speech, that's what it is.
At the same time, they can argue against the framework, or they can simply offer a counter framework.
Right.
Frameworks aren't necessarily in clash with each other. It's simply, again, you saying, judge, view the round through this scope, don't view it through that scope. The negative team has every right to come up here and give you a framework that includes economics and innovation, talking about how the team that shows the largest economic impact, not the one that helps the most people, should win.
Right.
And those things don't just immediately negate each other. You're just then going to have to show the better arguments and why they should choose your framework over theirs. And
then you get into impact calculation and all that fun stuff.
Which is the beautiful part of debate.
Yeah. Okay, so this first contention of this pro case is utilitarianism shows that price controls are the moral decision. There's a couple subpoints under this. Subpoint A is that 45 million Americans can't afford their medications. It's pretty simple. This evidence says 45 million Americans did not fill a prescription in 2016 due to the cost of pharmaceuticals. This rate of foregoing medicine due to cost is 9 times higher than in the UK, which we'll come back to later, where they do have some price control set up. So this argument does a couple things. First, it shows a good large number of Americans that can't afford their medication, specifically due to cost, and it shows that that's different than where there are price controls. The subpoint B under this contention is that consumers cut back elsewhere for high-priced medications, hurting their quality of life. some more heartstrings. Essentially what it talks about is large numbers of people skimp on groceries and rely on credit cards, don't pay off their other bills, that kind of thing, just to afford their medications. There's a long card. I'm not going to read it. What?
Just to retroactively add some citations in there, the subpoint A was from Jordy Dart on February 6th of 2017 from the Prescription Justice and Citizen PR web. And the subpoint B was from Ginger Skinner on June 21st of 2016 from Consumer Reports. Always make sure to get those citations in there.
Yeah, I forgot to read I don't know why I didn't read the citations. As we said, these cards are available in the Canada Briefs if you want them, or if you just want to look them up yourselves, that's totally cool too. So that's what the first contention is. Utilitarianism shows price controls are the moral decision. The second contention is a simple one. It says Americans want price controls. Mitani, 2018, from the Baltimore Sun. Nearly 80% of Americans want the government to limit what pharmaceutical corporations charge. That's the idea behind this. Essentially, the argument is the United States should do what its citizens want, and its citizens want price controls. It's just a short little add-on argument. Contention 3, price controls could literally save lives. More heartstrings here. Subpoint A is cancer treatment. Kaiser Health News 2017, 1/4 of all cancer patients chose not to fill a prescription due to cost, and about 20% filled only part of a prescription or took less than the prescribed amount. Stopping drugs could be cutting years from some patients' lives. What this is it's just showing, even in terms of life-saving drugs like cancer treatment, some people will skip out because of how expensive it is. And this is a pretty easy link to make. If it was cheaper, they'd take it, and it could be life-saving.
And not to get anecdotal, but I mean, this one really isn't hard to wrap your brain around. It's a great contention to bring into any round because almost everybody knows somebody who's had cancer. A lot of people even have somebody in their family who's had cancer. Obviously, it's a very stressful disease just from the emotional standpoint, physically, right. Not to mention the financial costs associated. And you could kind of make that link anecdotally with this. Just be careful going too far into maybe referencing your own personal experience. Just try to stay general whenever getting anecdotal with links and your transitions between points.
Yeah, an easy way to do this is the evidence. I skipped over this part, but it says given that more than 1.6 million Americans are likely to be diagnosed with cancer this year, right after that you could say, like my grandmother or whoever, if you do know somebody.
Yeah, or like most of us, and you could even go very general and straight up say, just like most of us in this room probably know somebody who's had cancer, we understand the kind of stress that it can bring to a family, emotionally, physically, and financially. And that's where you're going to be able to tie directly into the judge's personal experience, and they might actually identify with your argument, which is one of the best things that can happen as a first speaker. Right.
And keep in mind, you don't have to do it that way. You are free not to bring up any personal experience or anecdotal evidence. Your style is your style. If you found your style, stick with it if it's working. But that's just something you can do. Now, the subpoint B for this contention is that cheaper medications lower life-threatening incidents. Brody 2017 brings up an example. Aetna offered free medications to patients who survived a heart attack, and adherence, which is the rate at which people take their prescriptions, improved by 6%, and there were 11% fewer heart attacks and strokes compared with patients who paid for their medications and had an adherence rate of slightly better than half. So what this shows is that when the cost barrier is taken away, people take their medications as they're prescribed more often, and there are less heart attacks and strokes. In this instance, obviously, the medication is for heart attacks and strokes, but the overall theory behind the argument is cost is a barrier, take that barrier away, and adherence rate will improve, and life-threatening incidents will decrease. So that's pretty much the case. Just to go over that real quick again, moral obligation in the resolution, utilitarianism is bringing the most advantages to the most people. That's how the round should be judged. Contention 1 is about that being the moral decision. Subpoint A, 45 million Americans can't afford their medications. Subpoint B, consumers cut back elsewhere for their drugs, hurting their quality of life. Contention 2, Americans want price controls. Just a simple poll that showed 80% of Americans want price controls. And then contention 3, price controls could literally save lives with subpoint A, cancer treatment costs, and subpoint B, cheaper medications, lowering life-threatening incidents. So, Lucas, after hearing this, if I had actually, you can see the actual evidence as if I had read it as a case read. What would you say against this? And we'll kind of go back and forth and discuss here.
Yeah, let's go up to the top really quick. So, I don't really have a problem with their framework as a negative coming into this round. I don't see it as abusive. The word should is defined that way in many different places. So debating that definition is going to be a time suck. There's really no point to get into it unless that's the way you want to do it.
Right.
Utilitarianism being the scope that the affirmative team is saying the judge should use to weigh the round. I might only disagree with that because I honestly wouldn't even disagree with that. I would probably just permutate that onto the negative side and say that the negative team is going to more effectively bring more good to more people under the status quo. And that's what I'm going to get into a little bit in these contentions. But yeah, the framework doesn't raise any red flags to me as a negative. I would most likely just let it ride or try to take it to my side even. So
you wouldn't bring up any answer to philosophical theory for utilitarianism?
It's just... Again, I would agree with your framework, and then I'm going to get into something later about incentivizing the creation of these drugs in the first place.
Okay, yeah.
And about how if these companies and these researchers couldn't make the money that they do make off of them, the medicine probably wouldn't exist in the first place.
Okay, that makes sense.
If we're talking about doing the most good for the most people...
Right.
The medicine doesn't exist. It can't do any good.
Okay. Well, yeah, we'll talk about that when you get there.
Yeah, we're going to circle back to that. And that's kind of what I'm thinking about in using the util against them. But on contention ones, where utilitarianism shows price controls are the moral decision. He references the dark card again in 2017. Also, you can get this card and a whole lot more wonderful evidence from Candor Briefs.
CandorBriefs@gmail.com.
In his subpoint A, he talks about how 45 million Americans cannot afford their medications. He cites a card from Jordy Dart in 2017. And again, all the evidence that we go over today in the podcast will be available in where, Quentin?
Candor Briefs. Thank you.
CandorBriefs@gmail.com. So the first thing I would get at in this card as a negative speaker is that the card is kind of hard to interpret. 45 million Americans did not fill a prescription in 2016 due to the cost of pharmaceuticals, with 18% of adults reporting this problem. I don't know, 18% of 45 million are reporting the problem. Quentin, could you explain this evidence a little bit to me? Because that's the first question I'm going to hit you with in Crossfire.
I believe the idea is that of those surveyed, 18% reported this problem, which equaled out to 45 million.
Okay, so...
But that doesn't make sense.
While he's doing those quick maths, I'm going to move down to the subpoint B, and we will circle back around to this. We're going to try and keep you guys road mapped as well as we can. And if you're not familiar with what road mapping is, you should ask your coach first, because they're going to be able to explain it better than we can. But just putting it simply, road mapping and signposting are debate words for telling the judge where you are and what you're talking about before you start talking about it. Obviously, it's very easy to run down an entire affirmative or negative case as the second speaker without transitions, but to put all those attacks together in a way that's comprehensive and easy to follow is where the difficulty comes into play.
And then I do have an answer.
He has an answer.
So yeah, I think whatever the survey group was, 45 million, like 18% of the U.S. population comes out to around that. So I'm not sure exactly what the survey group was, but the numbers match up pretty close. 18% of the U.S. population comes out between whatever, I don't know, is it like...
That doesn't work because it's 400, well, okay, so let's say the population of the U.S. is 400 million, 10% of that
is... it's not.
I know. So I'm saying the population is only like 325 million.
Right, so let's do... If it's 325, we do 325,000,000 times 0.18 is about 58.
Fun fact, I'm just really bad at math on the fly.
So 2016 U.S. population.
Never underestimate the power of Google.
Population census, U.S. population 2016. 322. So yeah, about
325.
Yeah. It's close enough that I think the numbers make sense.
Okay. See, that's the first place I would come at with that, just because not every first speaker is going to have the ability to explain that card back to you in a way that's going to make any sense. And that's going to make it clear to the judge that they don't understand their own evidence. That's enough to defeat a point sometimes.
Even if it's the greatest point in the world, creating doubt
is all it may take.
Yeah.
But then to go further down into the same contention, we're going to go to the subpoint B, which is where it talks about how consumers have cut back elsewhere for high-priced meds, which hurts their quality of life. This comes from Skinner in 2016. And essentially it's talking about how a lot of people have skipped filling prescription. They aren't taking their prescribed dosage. They're splitting pills without contacting their doctor, so on and so forth. It even shows instances where they might be sharing medications with other people who have similar doses or medications. And all these things obviously are not good. As the negative team, I'm worried when a piece of evidence like this comes to the table because those are direct harms that can actually be quantified. Now, to attack back on this, let me just read this really quickly. Quentin, if you have anything you want to throw in, that'd be great.
So what we're going to do is after he gets done going down the case and kind of showing attacks, we're going to discuss back and forth how I would respond in my rebuttal speech. We're not going to give actual speeches. I don't want to do that. I don't want to make you just listen to a debate. I want to be able to discuss, but I will have answers to these arguments.
Okay, so I think I actually have something now, which is unfortunate as coming at it from this angle may be and may sound, you have to do it right. Something Quentin said earlier in the podcast is really important. As the negative team, you can't sound like big, scary, bad government,
like you don't
corporation
care,
man that doesn't care about people. But at the same time, it's not your fault necessarily that people can't afford things.
Right.
It's really easy to come up here to consumers are having to shift price or shift their money around, or they're having to not take their medication properly and say, well, that's not the responsibility of pharmaceutical industries to make sure people are making enough money. It's really doesn't fall onto them. That falls back onto the federal government and to the businesses that pay these people in the first place. And ultimately, you can just kind of argue that maybe it's non-unique in much the same way that some people can't afford a car, so because of that, they can't go get a better job in a better area. That isn't the fault of car companies because the cars are too expensive. So right. I don't see how it could be the fault of a pharmaceutical company that their medicine's too expensive if the company that someone works for isn't paying them a fair wage.
Right. And so Lucas attacked that well. He was able to show the argument without sounding at first rude and like he didn't care. But as the pro team, as soon as I heard that, I would blow that up, I would make it sound like Lucas did not give a crap about anybody. And I would try to turn that as best as I could to say, it's not necessarily your fault, but that's what we're trying to change in the debate is the status quo. And that's just something you learn how to do. There's really no way to teach how to, turn an argument and how it's perceived.
And really, this is where, if you have it, or if it's available in any of the briefs that you have, you're going to want to bring evidence about people not maybe being able to afford other things in their day-to-day life. Because if you can show that people being strapped on cash for necessities is a non-unique thing, it's not just happening with pharmaceuticals, but it's happening with electric costs, with rent costs, with education costs, like it is. That isn't the fault of a pharmaceutical company. That's the fault of a federal government that hasn't set up wages well. Now, again, they can probably try to turn it back into something about how the resolution is about the United States federal government making this change. But then as the negative team, you could really just say this isn't the right way to go about it. You could say there are many other things that they could do that would help alleviate the burden that this is creating that isn't controlling the pharmaceutical industries and potentially limiting that innovation, which again is what we're going to get into later.
Right. And just to clarify also, there are totally pieces of evidence that you can use to attack these. But kind of what we're trying to do, at least in this instance, is show how to use theory and logic arguments against good pieces of evidence.
Because what you're going to find is that the raw amount of academia that exists on any given topic that they're going to throw at you in any kind of debate, really, not even just public forum, it's just tremendous. There's so much information available. So chances are, if you can think of the argument, someone else has also thought of the argument, and somebody with credentials has made it. So then you can think of it, write it down, and then go find it.
Right. And I'm sure, listening to this card, if you've debated this topic at a tournament so far, you've heard this kind of argument, chances are you have found a card that you have that, you use against this. The idea is to stack logic and theory on top of evidence. So in this instance, against this argument, Lucas would say, it's not the fault of us. They should pay their employees better. But even so, here's evidence also. You want to sort of create a wall of arguments, theory and logic mixed with actual evidence.
So something I've always done, just going into being a second speaker, or something I always did rather, is a standard case in public forum debate has 3 contentions, and that seems to be the running standard still, even though I'm not in high school debate anymore. And as a negative, you have the unique opportunity to build a case against each one of their contentions.
Right.
1 point is great by itself sometimes, and 2 points together can couple, but 3 points together can really make for a tremendous impact calculus. Now, then if you as the negative speaker go up and show 3 counterpoints to each one of their contentions that can actually flow together in the same way that a case would, you've effectively created a case against each one of their contentions.
Yep.
But that's going to be covered a lot more in the following months, as well as in following podcasts, breaking down arguments, talking about argumentation. We could do hours and hours of that, and it's not what we're here to talk about right now.
We may sometime, though.
For sure.
And if you're interested, into having just like a 4-hour podcast about just like argumentation theory in general.
And if that's something that you would be interested in hearing, definitely let us know are we on Twitter?
Yes, we are on Twitter at Former Partners. At
Former Partners on Twitter. Hit us up. Direct message us, tweet us, whatever you want to do. Let us know what you're wanting to hear from us. Let us know what you liked, what you didn't like. We're definitely open to criticism. We know what the internet's like, so we're not going to be surprised by anything you say.
Yeah, I'm ready to get blasted already.
I enjoy Reddit very much, so please do your best.
Dude, I got crazy super downvoted for asking people to buy my brief and not trade it. Is that amazing or what? I mean, I get it.
I get it as well.
I used debate trade all the time whenever I was in high school, but it's just so weird being on the other side now.
I think what we need to try and let you as our listeners understand is that majority of the content that we create is going to be free, the vast majority. And a lot of the things that we put out are also going to be free, like the podcast itself, as well as some of the other things we cover. The only reason that we ever put a price tag on anything is so that we can keep doing this, so we can keep putting out high quality podcasts, debate briefs for you guys, so that we can keep increasing the quality of debate and hopefully creating more educated citizens.
Yeah.
I can't let you know really how much debate has helped me in my day-to-day life.
Yeah. And talking about, that's why we put the price tag on. Just as a little tangent, Luke's and I, we both work full-time jobs aside from this. A pretty good look at my day-to-day is, I get off work anywhere from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. And then the other night I stayed up literally all night after I got off work, cutting cards, making a brief for Candor, and then had to go do more stuff the next day. And I didn't sleep for like 36 hours just to get it all done.
And this is not to get you guys to feel bad for us, like, woe is me, I'm a real adult and I have a real life. It's just to really put in perspective that, straight up, there's a certain amount of hours in the day, and we need to be able to sleep. And as it stands, we just don't have as many hours as we'd like to spend on this stuff. And the more that you support us, the more hours we can spend on it, the better it's going to get. So if you like it, maybe think about supporting us. Maybe think about getting your school on board with supporting us.
Yeah.
Because that's also an option. You can have your coaches contact us, and we can work out a deal with our evidence packets.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, sorry for that little tangent. I've been meaning to figure out a way to kind of get that message out for a while. I don't want to seem like a money-hungry dude, but it's the only way that I can sustain, as if I start making any money off this. So anyway, attacking contentions. Contention 2 is Americans want price controls. A simple poll, 80% of Americans want it. How would you attack that?
This one's difficult because the very first thing I want to say is that this is a bandwagon fallacy. That just because something's popular doesn't mean that something's good. And that's just a logical fallacy. You don't need to bring any sort of evidence in to support something like that. It might be convenient for you to do so if they decide to push back on it. But I mean, you could even just reference something that's really obvious. Like at one point in time, slavery was really popular in the United States, but then we decided to get rid of that because it was time to change. Just because something's popular doesn't mean it's good.
And that's now, really all you need to say.
Be careful relating the price controls of pharmaceuticals to slavery, especially when you're on a topic that's including morality, because then your opponents might just decide to put you in a glass box and make you look stupid.
But you get the idea. Just because a lot of people like something, that doesn't mean it's good.
Like World War II, wartime economy was fantastic, but it killed 80 million people around the world.
Yeah.
It was popular, but it's not necessarily a good thing. Now, contention 3, price controls could literally save lives. Subpoint A, cancer treatment, Kaiser Health News 2017. This is the big one that all affirmative teams were arguing, as far as I know. They can go in there and they can say literally, oh, we're going to save 100 million people if you vote affirmative. Right. And it's really easy to win around doing that. And it's really hard as a negative team to go in there and say you shouldn't vote for saving lives. You should vote for saving money.
Yeah.
But you can totally do that and still win the round. That's what I'm going to try and do right now. So what you're going to want to try and find here, and I'm not sure if we have this evidence available. Quentin covers that a lot better than I do in the Candor brief, is essentially say that we don't know if these medications would even exist in the first place if it wasn't for the fact that it is a multi-million-dollar industry. We don't know if scientists would spend hours and hours on end in laboratories trying to create these chemicals. We don't know if pharmaceutical managers would try to negotiate for people and if insurance companies would try and make these things if it wasn't such a lucrative business. And the simple fact of the matter is, you might see a world where if the U.S. federal government imposes too strict of cost controls on pharmaceuticals, that some of these pharmaceuticals that could save lives would never exist in the first place.
Yeah.
All of the empirical data that we have in the U.S. about pharmaceuticals is not a lot of price controls. So it's really easy to say the status quo shows that not having price control saves lives. We don't know if that change is going to cause a greater saving of life.
Yep.
Now, this is where the affirmative team is going to compare us to another country, and they're going to say, well, in the UK, they did price controls, and it actually worked really well. It increased the number of people that were able to seek treatment. But still, it's not the U.S. We're the largest economy in the world. We are the third most populated country in the world. There's a lot of logistical concerns that would come into something like this. It's really easy to win a ballot just on some doubt, and that's what you're casting when you say something like that.
Yeah. In response, I would probably say, because you're essentially saying profit drives innovation.
Yeah, I don't know if a scientist or a pharmacologist is going to want to even make a new cure for cancer or a new treatment for cancer, rather.
Right.
Unless he's going to make $20 million off of it.
Right. And that's pretty much like we talked about earlier. That's the con side in a nutshell, is profit drives innovation. Without that, who knows, in response, I'm going to go ahead and just insert what I would say in my rebuttal here. I would bring up one card. It pretty much says, let me find it. It brings up the rates of research and development and what's used out of profit. And it shows that really wouldn't be an issue. So let's see, where is that at?
What he is sorting through right now, where he's saying where is that, is the Candor brief that we keep plugging. We're not necessarily sure what is an appropriate number of plugs for our own other things that we do.
Dude, I don't know. I mean, podcasts. This is the one resource I use while we do the podcast. So this is the argument I would use. There's a couple cards in here. It's election March 2018. Pretty much says after tax deductions, only about 1.3% of the money that the industry spends actually goes into research. So that's what I would say. I would say that there's a huge profit margin, and not a lot of it actually goes into research, development, innovation. Now, at this point in the debate, if I said that in my rebuttal speech, it's just up in the air now. It's up to the judge. There's a grand crossfire left and a final focus. But where would you, if you had a chance in a grand crossfire in your final focus, whatever, where would you go after hearing that?
Can you pull it back up for me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the first thing I'm going to say is that this card is based exclusively on the French market. I see that from reading the evidence. So when you're talking about impact calculus and how pharmaceutical industries work, it's hard to say that this is how the profit margins are in the US because it does specifically say that it's from the French market. Now, even assuming that this is how the market works in the United States, it doesn't matter. Because again, if they're used to making a 98.7% profit on every single pharmaceutical pill they push, I don't think that any sort of price restriction that the US can impose that would be reasonable for the company is also going to be reasonable for the consumer.
Right.
It's going to become problematic because we have to look at this from a realist perspective. It would be great if U.S. federal government could just say, hey, everybody, stop selling your drugs for too much money. Also, just go ahead and make less profit.
Yeah.
But that's not going to happen.
You know what I just realized?
What?
In this right now, I'm supposed to be like debating against you, but we were partners for so long. I'm like, yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, absolutely.
It's understandable.
It's so hard not to support you.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. We're going to be very supportive and contradictory of each other, and we're going to say things that don't make sense on occasion. And if we do, please call us out because, again, we're only trying to refine this product that we're trying to get out to you guys.
And it's literally been, what, like 4 years since we debated now?
Well, for you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because I
did the limited amount of debate and the limited amount of college that I attended.
Anything on the subpoint B, cheaper medications, lower life-threatening incidents?
So is this essentially saying that, again, if it's cheaper, more people will take it?
Essentially, yeah.
I mean, I just can't help but get away from the whole concept that the medicine wouldn't exist in the first place if the money wasn't there. I don't know if you can illustrate that with evidence, but you can illustrate it with the status quo. Under the status quo, without pharmaceutical controls, we're having wonderful medical innovation. We're having wonderful medical advancement. There's so many new drugs coming out that are helping so many people. And if we just change that by cutting their profits in half, cutting it down to a quarter, because what was your number? Like 20% of people couldn't afford, or no, 45 million Americans can't afford
18%, yeah.
18% or 45 million Americans. Well, I don't know how many Americans are taking prescription drugs every day.
Right.
But if 45 million can't afford it, I don't know how much they're going to have to lower it to make those 45 million afford it.
Yeah.
Because I don't know by what margin they are missing the mark.
And it's hard to be able to debate that.
Yeah, because that's the kind of data collection that is rare. It doesn't occur very often because it's so specific. It's very personal, too. They have to get people's incomes. They have to get people's schedules almost.
And it would be impossible to debate that in a public forum round where the longest speech you have is 4 minutes.
I don't want to say it would be impossible. We've definitely been able to work in some...
In today's debate, what I'd like to tell you is that there's so many people that can't afford their medications, and here's the specifics on it.
Having the evidence available and referencing the evidence is different than citing the evidence and actually reading directly from it. But unless you have something that can illustrate a way that these companies can cut the cost, like a rate at which would be recommended to cut the costs that would create an even ground, this really just seems like a topic that puts the ball totally and completely in the consumer's court if you vote affirmative.
Yeah.
Whereas the negative team has the ability to approach this and say, no, we don't need to put the ball in the consumer's court because we don't know what that's going to do.
Yeah. Okay, so looking back over the attacks made, this is just a pretty brief, what I would say in a rebuttal speech. Probably going to be pretty accurate since rebuttals are only 2 minutes. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to go over this pretty briefly. First contingent subpoint A, 45 million Americans can't afford. He just had questions about the study, which we figured out. I would bring that up in my rebuttal that there was no real attack. Doubt was cast and that was it, but we figured it out, so that point still stands. Subpoint B, consumers cut back, so it hurts quality of life. Lucas argued that it's not their fault, not Negative's fault, and not the pharmaceutical industry's fault that these people aren't getting paid what they should to be able to afford their medication. In response to this, again, just theory, just logic, I would argue that that issue is what we have the ability to change in today's debate by voting affirmative. That's what I'd tell the judge. I'd say, they're right. It's not the Negative's fault. It's not the pharmaceutical industry's fault, but you have the opportunity to change that today by voting affirmative. Second contention, Americans want it. 80% want price controls. He argued bandwagon fallacy, which is a good argument. Logical fallacies are always something good to bring up. My response would be bandwagon fallacy isn't bandwagon fallacy whenever you live in a democratic nation. I would argue that something being popular with citizens in a nation where laws are supposed to represent what they want, 80% is a good reason to pass price controls.
This is an interesting counterpoint to bring up because I love it, due to the fact that you're going to have judges that agree and disagree with this counter.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have the judge that's like, yeah, we are a democracy and the people should generally get what they want. And they're going to agree with him. And then you're going to have no judges that recognize that we're a democratic republic and that the people don't always know what's best for them, and that we elect people to make these decisions for us so that we can stop horrible things from happening with mob rule.
Yeah,
and so that's just going to be in the hand of your judge. And that's what's going to happen a lot of times in these rounds. When both teams do exactly what they're supposed to, it's all going to be on the judge.
It's all up in the air. And it's so fun. Oh my God, I love it.
There is not a way to win every round.
Right. And then that third contention, we already talked about that a little bit. Lucas brought up, profit means innovation. I brought up some clashing evidence. Lucas said, that's not specific to the United States. Status quo is working as well as it can. Kind of a Schrodinger's cat thing. I mean,
it's scary because you have to consider, for one, the U.S. federal government doesn't really have the right to make a change like this.
Right.
All power is not left to the federal government or left to the states. The only way you can kind of work that in is with the health and wellness clause, I think is what it's called.
I don't know. We have a question that we're going to talk about that with a little bit.
Okay, yeah. There is something in the Constitution relating to health and wellness that lawmakers occasionally cite that allow them to make litigation and policy related to public health. In an instance like seatbelts, in an instance like vaccines, stuff like that, preventing communicable diseases from spreading like rapid fire. But it would probably be pretty easy to argue and I'm just now thinking of this, I wish I had brought it up earlier, an entire negative case about how it's not the U.S. federal government's right to do any of these things.
Right, which we will talk about later. That is a negative argument that was in the brief. And actually, we got a question about it, so we'll talk about that a little bit.
Where did that question come from?
From Carthage.
From Carthage?
Yeah, one of the students there.
Yeah, and this is something else, little brief segue. We're talking about those questions, which he said we'll touch later. If you guys have any questions about any current, past, future, any kind of topics, really anything at all, send those to us, because if we like them enough and we think they cover enough of an important issue, or if they're just interesting, we'll work them into the podcast. You might even see evidence in the Condor briefs cut based on that question.
One of my favorite things to do is when people email me saying, hey, I hit this argument and I can't find evidence against it. I love to find evidence against it and send it back. So if you have any questions about, a specific argument you can't beat or find an answer to, or argument theory or debate etiquette, or questions for us about, hey, why should we listen to you? Ask us.
Or we even know that some of you students are on humongous debate squads, and you may not feel like you can always approach the resources that you have in front of you, whether that be your teachers or your peers. If the only way you feel comfortable to ask these questions is to do so anonymously to us on Twitter, or do we have like an AMA anywhere?
No, not yet. I've been thinking about making one.
Okay. Well, anyway, we'll have those plugs and those informations in the description of this podcast, I'm sure. But please
start
ask
at
us.
Twitter.
Yeah.
Start at Twitter, and there will be a way to get a hold of us somewhere.
Yeah, because if you're scared to talk to your coach, which I know some of you are, I was at some points too.
Yeah.
Talk to us. We're just two regular guys that did the same thing that you guys are doing right now, just like 4 years ago.
Yep. This is decades and decades ago. I feel like, dude, whenever I go back and I visit Carthage and I I feel like Paul Edgecombe in The Green Mile when he's like 108 years old and still messing with Mr. Jingles. I watched that the other night, so it's in my head. I'm sorry.
I think this is where we differ at our core, because I think of myself more as Tuck from Tuck Everlasting.
Oh my God.
And everybody that taught me is just getting older, but I'm staying young.
That I don't know why that just made me think of that Val Kilmer movie where he what is it, dude? I can't say that. Let's not talk about that.
Yeah, well, something important for all the coaches to know that may or may not be listening to this is that the standard issue of our Former Partners podcast is going to be kept as PG as possible. We are going to make it in such a way that you could show it in class in a way that you'd allow your students to be able to listen to it without your supervision if you so desired. We don't want to make this something that's unusable for public education, because obviously that doesn't serve its purpose very well.
That's the point. So we're going to do our best. If something slips through, I apologize, but I'm going to work really hard on editing this.
If something slips through, call us on it.
Yeah.
If we're making too many euphemisms for your taste, if we're being straight up raunchy, call us out. We will stop it because we want to be able to keep doing this.
I'm just thinking about a really funny Val Kilmer movie. Anyway, okay, so we're going to do what we just did for the cases on the pro side, except now on the con side. I have a con case, 1 observation, 4 contentions that I'm going to read over pretty briefly, and we're going to do the same thing. So this observation is called the law of unintended consequences. Essentially what it is, do you remember when I used to...
Is that Murphy's Law?
Pretty much, yeah.
Nice.
It's Murphy's Law, except better.
Okay.
A guy named Robert K. Merton, he made this theory called the imperious immediacy of interest. It pretty much says that people, and especially government, whenever they try to pass something or do something, there's always effects that are unanticipated or unintended, but they will ignore them. And so the idea is that the imperious immediacy of interest is instances in which someone wants the intended consequence of an action so much that he purposefully chooses to ignore any unintended effects. So what this is pretty much us saying the pro side wants to help these people that can afford their medication so badly, they are willing to ignore all the negative things that are going to come from price controls.
And this is what I was trying to get at in my attacks to the pro team earlier, and I'm glad that we have a more official way to say it.
Yeah.
When you're talking about economic impact, it's really easy to talk about tipping points, where if spending X amount of dollars more is going to cause economic collapse, it doesn't matter what kind of benefits spending that money might bring if it's going to collapse the economy. Much in the same way, if cutting pharmaceutical prices is going to be good for citizens, it doesn't matter if it's going to destroy the pharmaceutical industry so bad that they're not going to make any new medicine. Right.
And that's the argument, is essentially just pointing out to everybody, consider these unintended consequences. Because you know what happens in debate. Both sides, try to prove their points and totally try to just ignore what the other side is saying. That's sort of the point of debate. Not ignore, but consider and then take that argument down. This law of unintended consequences is a good way to show that there will always be unintended consequences, and they must at least be considered.
Yeah, and it's what's unfortunate about the medium in which we have been presented, public forum debate, is that the very nature of allowing the negative team to go first sometimes might completely eliminate clash from the round. Yeah. Meaning that they have to have a case that is ascertained prior to even knowing what the pro team may be running. Right. This isn't an inherently bad thing because it does keep the debate fresh. It keeps it educational for the most part. But you can get into an instance where you have no clash whatsoever and you don't even have to touch the other team's case. You're just trying to argue that your framework is more important and that your impacts are greater. Right.
So let's say these contentions. Contention 1, important drugs are less accessible in countries with price controls. Ellis, October 30th. Drugs widely available in the U.S., thanks in part to our lack of price controls, were only 3/4 as available in the U.K., half as available in Japan, and nearly unavailable at all in Greece. These types of drugs have an average 17-month delay in reaching patients in countries with price control regimes. This is a pretty simple argument to make. Where there are price controls, it kind of brings in the argument of shortages, or at least, difficulty shipping, spreading, producing these drugs. Where they have price controls, it's harder to get the drugs.
Now, it's interesting because obviously we're flipping sides now. We're reading a negative case, so I'm going to be arguing affirmative points in response to anything that Quentin tries to bring up. Almost all public forum resolutions are cyclical, meaning that effectively any argumentation on one side can be applied to the other, just with different impacts.
Yep.
So right there where he talked about how there's not as much access to these better medicines in these countries where there are pharmaceutical price controls, I'm just going to say it's at least the people that have it can afford it, though.
Right.
And that's where you're going to come back, and where the affirmative team just argued, or excuse me, the negative team might have just argued that the pharmaceutical industry will collapse if we put too strict of pharmaceutical restrictions on, so there won't be any drugs in the first place. Well, this is the opposite end of that. This is, well, it doesn't matter if these drugs take too long, or take a longer time, rather, to get into some of these countries that have these price controls, because it means now that people can actually afford it.
Right.
So, something to consider, just kind of a neat little thing that might help you understand better the logic of how your debate round is flowing.
In that argument that it's less accessible in price control countries, every time I talk about that, I get so excited, because you can, whenever I've done practice debates on this topic with people, the words affordable does not mean accessible.
I actually have to ask, is that chalked up to distribution networks and medical facilities, or is that tracked up to the actual governments and the pharmaceutical price controls themselves?
I really think it's, at least in that evidence, it's about the price controls themselves and shortages.
Okay, because if you're able to prove that a link to the topic, or that a piece of evidence is linked to the topic is not topical, then it's an atopical piece of evidence. That's how that works.
Yeah.
So if I'm able to prove that it's actually not because of price regulations in Uruguay that they can't afford cancer medications, actually because they have crappy infrastructure and they can't get medicines distributed properly, regardless of if they can afford it, then it doesn't matter if they have that.
Yeah, it's not about their shipping routes or anything. It's related to the price controls.
Those are the kind of questions I would definitely bring up in a crossfires. Are you sure this is what these studies are looking at for impact calculus?
And that's a great question, actually. So contention 2, price controls harm the economy, consumers, and research. This is from Darren Filson in 2007, throwing it back a little bit. Says if the U.S. adopts price controls, the flow of new drugs fall by approximately 75%. Industry value falls 80%. Research and development costs are sunk, and consumer welfare in the U.S. falls. Lower prices yield short-run benefits, but the harmful effect of the reduced flow of new drugs outweighs the price effect in the long run. Consumer welfare falls by over $13 trillion year $2000, which, when applied to 2018, that's about $19 trillion.
What does it mean by consumer welfare falls by $13 million a year? $13 trillion a year.
Consumer welfare, net present value. It's sort of GDP. But it's essentially investment, innovation, that kind of thing.
What is the current...
If I understand correctly.
Okay, I'm going to give that a Google just to make sure we're not demonstrating principles of economics incorrectly.
Right,
because we will get grilled for that. There are way more educated people about economics out there than us.
I kind of link it in the same article to the industry value falls 80%.
Oh, absolutely.
So the value of the industry as a whole drops, so investment drops. And just domino effect down. Consumer welfare, I know it covers a big group of things. And I don't know for sure exactly what it is. So give that a Google and read me a good old definition.
Net present value. It's the value in the present of a sum of money in contrast to some future value it will have when it has been invested at compound interest.
Okay.
So this is essentially just a projection of profits.
Yeah.
Showing you that.
And value of dollars.
Yeah. It's saying that if this much money is taken out of the investments for the medical industry via price control limitations, this is the effect it's going to have on the industry in this long.
Yeah. So that I put that in because I think it's a great economic argument. Mm-hmm. Any judge hears $19 trillion and it'll blow their mind. It's a huge impact calc, and it's not very easily beaten, at least in the practice rounds I've done.
Yeah, because that is... So when people talk about millions, billions, trillions of dollars, it's important to consider that there are not that many countries in the world that even have a GDP over $1 trillion.
Yeah.
So
that's
whenever you're
lot of money.
Talking about $19 trillion, you're talking about
money.
More than an entire GDP, or more than an entire annual GDP of the United States. Excuse me, I had a stroke there.
I'm trying to picture like $19 trillion.
Oh, you can't. I mean, try to picture 25 unique paper clips in your head. It's not easy. You can't. The human brain is extremely limited. Unless you put them in rows of 5x5, then you might be able to do it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, see.
Yeah, I can't count them in my head.
We're logarithmic thinkers. It's a whole other conversation we could have.
Anyway, contingent 3, price controls drive away billions in development investment. Pitts 2017. It brings up the same thing as before, but the big part here is that the U.S. Department of Commerce calculates that price controls in Europe drive away $5 billion to $8 billion in potential pharmaceutical development investment each year. That prevents the creation of 3 to 4 new drugs annually. This loss of development dollars deprives all of us of new life-saving treatments. Just another big number, and it actually shows
I don't like
development.
this card.
Why not?
Deprives us of all new life-saving treatments. Do you know how many kinds of aspirin they make every year that are just like aspirin that already exists? 4 new medications a year really isn't that much to me. Now, if you could prove with another piece, which you may have it,
I probably do,
that it's specifically depriving us in industries like cancer research or in autoimmune
something actually
research.
Like life-saving.
Yeah, because if Bayer can't pump out another generalized brand of aspirin to sell under a different subsidiary every year, I don't feel bad.
Yeah, and that comes down to just availability of evidence on it.
Yeah.
And which we'd have to look.
The first thing I would say as an affirmative is that they are making a huge assumption that these 3 to 4 new drugs annually that we would not be generating due to price controls are automatically going to be life-saving treatments.
Yeah.
And also, I'm just going to tie it back to the fact that it doesn't matter how many life-saving treatments you have if people can't afford it. Right.
Yep. That's a good argument to keep making. I understand why that keeps getting brought up, because it's a good blanket to lay.
Well, and there wasn't a whole lot else you could have done with this resolution other than just going completely squirrel with it. Yeah. And when we say going squirrel with it, we refer to the fact that your case is nuts. It doesn't make any sense usually, or it's like very loose links to the resolution, and you found a way to technically make it topical. It's not a bad thing either, but it does sometimes lower the academic quality of the debate. Right. So sometimes the best road and the most obvious method is, in fact, the best road and the most obvious method.
Right. So contention 4, this is sort of where I bring in an answer or an alternative. Contention 4 is patient assistance programs cushion most of the cost of drugs. This is Howard 2014. It says patient assistance programs offset patients' out-of-pocket drug costs, typically on generous terms. Biogen's program caps patients' co-payments at $10 per month, less than 1% of the total cost of the drug. Dendreon covers up to $6,000 of patients' co-payments, boasting that 75% of patients are expected to have minimal to no out-of-pocket costs. More than 300 drugs have associated patient assistance programs, and manufacturers spend about $4 billion per year on these programs. So the point of this is to show, yes, some drug prices are high, but these companies understand that some people can't afford this, so they have patient assistance programs. And it gives a couple of great examples. $10 a month for what seems to be almost of quick maths. I can't do that. A very expensive. What is $10 at 1%? Is that $100,000?
It'd be $1,000, wouldn't it?
No. Oh, I hate this.
I think it would be. You'd have to divide 10 by 0.1.
No, it'd be 10 times 100.
Or you could just divide it by 0.1. Right? No.
I don't know, man.
It says less than 1% too. I don't know. Because there's a huge difference between 1% and 0.5%.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what less than 1% would necessarily
Anyway, very cheap compared to the actual cost of the drug.
It smells like a Band-Aid to me.
Yeah. And that is a good attack.
It's just because we already have health insurance. And am I mistaken in saying that health insurance is supposed to also help cover the cost of pharmaceutical drugs, or is that a whole different kind of insurance, just like these programs?
No, yeah, I would agree with that.
It does.
Yeah,
health insurance
like
is
health
supposed
insurance
to.
will also take down the cost of pharmaceuticals.
So this is just a pharmaceutical specific health insurance provided by the same companies that are overcharging these people in the first place.
Right.
Seems kind of dirty to me.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm going to bring up as the affirmative. I'm going to say this is just them throwing the extra money that they obviously didn't need to make in the first place back at people.
Yeah.
This is pharmaceutical industries literally saying, look, we've made so much money price gouging you that we can pay for your medication with your money and you're going to feel good about it.
Yeah.
And that smells all kinds of wrong. And it should. It raises red flags because it's kind of... I don't know a good word for it. Because it's not tyrannical because they're not a governmental organization. It just seems like too much power for a pharmaceutical industry to have the ability to not only take all of your money but then to also give it back to you in the form of assistance.
Yep.
And if you didn't hear
Why
it
am
in
I
my
agreeing
voice,
with you
I
right
did
now?
air quotes. You're agreeing with me right now because
you're right.
Because like that's the thing is that both teams can be completely right about everything they say in a debate round. And that's what is unfortunate about these topics, and that's what makes them such good topics, and why people who make policy and litigation about these issues have such a hard time doing it, because there is some truth in almost everything you can say about it. You just have to find the best option at that moment for the most people that you can touch.
Right.
And it's difficult. Never
it is.
Never
It really
underestimate the difficulty that is associated with litigation and policymaking.
Yeah.
Not to make big government feel too good for itself there, but it definitely is not an easy thing to do sometimes.
No, it rarely is. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's why I'm glad that we get to just debate this in a little structured environment for 45 minutes and then not have to worry about the real world implications, because that's scary.
Yeah, because I need you to imagine sitting in a congressional chamber talking about this exact same thing with well over 500 people that all are worth hundreds of millions of dollars for weeks and weeks on end and moving like an inch in either direction maybe every day.
That's a lot of money.
It would just be... It'd be painful, to say the least. And at a certain point, the people who are advocating... Thanks for the cough.
Sorry.
At a certain point, the people for advocating for their side, whether it be for price controls or not for price controls, they're just going to fold. And that's where we get some of the policy
Yeah.
that comes out.
So that's the con case. We've talked enough on both sides about how to respond. I really like this con case, though. The law of unintended consequences put a really good framework on the round.
Yeah, that's what I would have brought up if I had been familiar with it in a better way. In attacking the affirmative case just a little bit ago, is that there's going to be unintended consequences, maybe in the form of pharmaceutical industries deciding not to sell in the United States altogether, or deciding not to base the research out of here, and that's going to pull jobs away, which is in turn going to pull equity away.
And there's no way to know.
Yeah.
It's unintended.
Which is why it's going to be pretty easy as a negative team to argue the status quo on a resolution like this, just because people fear the unknown. That's a fact.
Yeah. Let's move a little bit into just argumentation in general.
Okay.
A couple things that, apply to this topic and apply to debate in general. The first one we've talked a little bit about is logical fallacies. What logical fallacies is essentially things that sound right as an argument, but logically are off. They don't make sense. One great example of this is, on this topic, the argument that other countries do it, so we should too. I hear it all the time. We're the only developed nation that doesn't have a way to check these pharmaceutical prices. That's called the appeal to popularity fallacy, like we talked about earlier. Just because something is popular does not make it good, right?
Correct. And the reason that we talk about them from a logical perspective is that a lot of these logical fallacies, you can find lists of them. Some of your coaches probably have posters in your classrooms that have them on them. They can be proven mathematically. That's why they are considered to be logical fallacies. Because with something like a bandwagon fallacy, if everybody was on board for euthanasia, massive euthanasia of the entire U.S. population, it's really easy to show logically that is not something that they actually want.
Right.
Then it's not a good thing just because it's popular.
And because, what is popular is not correct. That's not how it works. And I know I talked about, in a democratic nation, we need to do what the citizens want. But that's what Lucas was talking about with what the popular decision is not necessarily the educated decision.
And that's why we're a democratic republic.
And that's where the appeal to popularity fallacy comes in. I would highly suggest looking over at least the most common logical fallacies. They come up all the time in debate. People do them all the time and don't even realize it. And it's the easiest block of your life.
Because you bring it up, and then unless they can restructure the entire argument they just brought up within that same piece of evidence, it's pretty much donezo.
Yeah, that's it. You showed them why the basis of their argument was completely off, and that's it. So look it up. Look up some logical fallacies.
Mm-hmm. You should definitely familiarize yourself with as many of those as possible. Some of them will never apply.
Yeah.
You're going to have... I'm trying to think of what it's called. It's like the green sleeves.
What?
Never mind. It's not a true Christian or not a real Christian.
Not a true Scotsman.
Yeah, no true Scotsman. That's it. It's rare that no true Scotsman will apply in a public forum round. And what that is when someone goes up there and says something along the lines of, no true Scotsman would ever duck out of a log throwing competition.
Right. Well, but in this instance, it's like no true American would vote against helping people live healthier.
Yeah, right. And that would actually be a prime example of how an affirmative team might try to spin this. So if you ever end up against an argument like that, where they're just trying to assume the character of a demographic, whether it be Americans, whether it be white people, or something like that, that doesn't work. You can't assume the character of any demographic of people, because we're not that simple.
And there's a couple different ones. Like one that I hear all the time is straw man. Mm-hmm. Straw man fallacy is when, your opponent will, or you may do it, I don't know. You will take what they're arguing and relate it to something else and attack that other thing as an attack to their argument. Right? So
essentially, yeah. So I like cars a lot. I try to use those as an example because it's easy for people to think about cars because we're around cars all the time. I'm affirming that we need 3-point harnesses instead of regular seat belts in cars as the new standard for safety in the U.S. And then they go up there talking about how automobile collisions have only increased in the last 30 years and cars are just dangerous, period. And then they just start talking about how dangerous cars are and it doesn't matter what we do or something along those lines.
Right.
Maybe that's not a good example of a straw man.
I don't know about that.
It's difficult maybe to create an example on the fly for me, at least. Quentin might be better at it than I am. It's more of a first speaker problem anyway.
The best way to explain straw man is just that if Lucas is arguing that the sky is blue, and something else comes up, like we start talking about the clouds, and I start talking about the color of the clouds to attack Lucas's argument. That's not how it works.
Yeah, I was talking about the sky is blue, and he's saying clouds are white, and that means the sky's not blue, and that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, that's a better example. You should listen to Quentin on that one.
It's been a long time since I've looked into him. Just look it up for yourself. It's going to be so much. It's going to be explained so much better by somebody who has a degree in some kind of philosophy.
And something that everybody who's listening is going to realize probably as they listen to more of these, hopefully, is that the quality of this ideally is only going to increase over time. This is our first attempt at this podcast, so we do apologize if this isn't exactly what you were looking for yet, and it's why we've been asking for feedback for most of the recording session today.
At Former Partners on Twitter.
Thank you, and have a good night.
So something else to consider, or at least think about, or try not to do, we want to talk about how to not accidentally run a counter plan whenever you're con and you show alternatives.
This is important because it's really easy to accidentally run a counter plan in public forum, because it would be so much fun if you were allowed to run counter plans in public forum.
But you're not, so don't, and especially not on accident.
Because all you have to do to avoid running a counter plan is, rather than saying, instead of the U.S. federal government imposing price regulations on pharmaceutical industries, there are actually 5 other ways that we could fix costs being too high for Americans. You then list all 5 of those ways, but you don't advocate for one of them specifically and say that you should vote for that instead. You're merely illustrating to the judge that what the affirmative team has presented today as a solution is not the only available solution, and then you need to tie that into some harms that are unique to it as well, and essentially say, hey, this is harmful on the affirmative side. There are other solutions on the table. You need to vote against this because it just doesn't make any sense to do that when we could be doing 5 other things instead.
It's a very thin line, as I've said.
Don't use the word instead, actually.
Yeah,
that's the one that'll pin you to the wall every time. I just did it.
Instead is the bad word. So yeah, I would have called counterplan on you just now.
Yeah. Simply say...
opportunity cost.
Yeah, I love opportunity cost.
That's the argument. You're not saying, one, that your alternatives are better. You're just saying that their idea is bad and other ideas exist. So don't vote for theirs.
And you're going to have affirmative teams that are probably going to try and do something along the lines of permutation in response to this, because it's definitely happened to us in the past where we would bring up a few alternatives and they would say, well, there's really no reason our actor that's given to us by the resolution couldn't do this. Then you just hit them back with, we're not advocating that you do these things instead. And also, you can't do that because you're only allowed to support the resolution as it's written and nothing else.
Alternatives are always good to bring up just because it's good to lay a foundation of what is going on in the realm of what you're debating. It sucks so bad when you accidentally run a counter plan, and it happens. Just don't.
Yeah, the best way to avoid actually running a counter plan is to only list optional other actions or other actors, but don't do both. If you list 5 other actions we could take that would have the same impact as they do, and just leave it at that those exist, then you're good. And if you list 5 other actors that might be able to do what they're trying to do better or safer or more economically, that's fine. And then just leave it at that. And then go into some arguments about why what the affirmative team is advocating for is also harmful in its own way.
Yeah, opportunity cost is the key. Just saying that kind of covers you, I think.
Whenever you're saying opportunity cost, for those that aren't completely familiar, and this may not be the best way to explain it, but essentially opportunity cost is an economic principle based in the idea that there's only a finite amount of money that you can invest in any given situation. So whenever you're investing money, if there was another investment that you could have taken that would have paid off better rather than the one you did take, you should have invested there instead. Yeah. And you lost that money because you didn't invest there instead.
And that's the idea behind opportunity cost.
And you're not saying, hey, Judge, you need to go invest in these other ideas. You're saying, Judge, you're going to lose money if you do invest in their idea.
Yep. So that's just how to keep away from counter plans. It's such a thin line, but it's such a good line to tread on.
Can we get into some of those questions you were talking about? I'm rather curious to see what students are asking us already.
So we had some people send in some questions just about different things that like we talked about are related to the topic, might not be related to the topic specifically, just debate in general. So let's look at what some of those are.
I'd like to give you a quick thank you to anybody who did send us these questions. Anybody who sends us questions on Twitter, if you want a shout out in the next podcast and we decide to feature your question, just include in the message when you send it to us that you're okay with us using your name in the podcast. Otherwise, we're just going to give you a question. We're not going to use your name because we don't want to get into any of that kind of litigation.
And hey, also let us know if you like win a tournament or something. I'd love to congratulate people on the air.
Especially
on the air,
if
like
you,
we're on the radio.
Especially if you happen to use Candor Briefs when you won that tournament. That'd be pretty cool for us to be able to talk about.
Okay, so one of the first questions we got was from Glendale High School. They wanted to know about the effect of price caps on overall prescription rates. Essentially, when a drug has a cap on it, is it prescribed more, is it prescribed less, etc. A lot of these questions I want to answer as the pro side and as the con side. But for this question, I think it actually is about the same. Sarnak et al. From the Commonwealth Fund 2017 says that recent analysis from Bloomberg compared the prices of 6 top-selling drugs across countries. Prices for any blockbuster drugs are markedly higher in the U.S. than elsewhere. Essentially, what this evidence shows is that these same 6 drugs are the top-selling drugs almost worldwide, but they are priced a lot higher in the U.S. than elsewhere. So whenever there's price caps on, like in those other countries, not in the U.S., they're still the top-selling drugs worldwide. That's the answer I would give.
I don't know if this is an answer to the question as it's asked, because what you have right here is really just an issue of cost of living. I think maybe.
What do you mean?
These drugs cost more in the U.S. because people in the U.S. make more money than other places. The U.S. dollar is worth more than essentially all other currencies. And I'm wondering if maybe the reason that those countries having, those are still the top selling drugs, but they're less expensive than in the U.S. Is that literally just because their currency is devalued compared to ours?
Well, I would say...
Because I think what they're asking is quite literally, if a drug has a cap put on it,
right,
are doctors going to prescribe it less because it won't make as much money for the medical industry?
Right, and this is where I know what they're asking. I mean, this evidence says the prices are higher in the U.S., but it's comparing the same top 6 drugs across all these countries. Now, you also said...
I'm asking, though, like, proportionately, though, is that drug still just as expensive in another country? Compared
what do you mean?
If I make $10 in the U.S., right, but that's worth $100 whatever somewhere else, and I'm paying $5 for my medicine here, is it 50 of their currency there, and they're saying it's like cheaper because of or is it 47 of their currency there?
I don't think so. I mean, I didn't cut the full card.
Yeah.
I just cut the part that I thought answered the question. But in the article, it talked about... the article is called Paying for Prescription Drugs Around the World. Why is the U.S. an outlier?
Yeah, I might just be being pedantic, but...
I think you are.
I just want to make sure that we're addressing the question in the way that it was asked, but I think I see what you're saying now.
I would say just because, it's been proven, I don't have the evidence on me, I've read it, that doctors prescribe drugs based on, first they offer the generics for whatever is needed, but then sometimes patients will ask for the brand name.
Makes sense.
I really don't think price caps have, if there's some effect on prescription rates, I don't think it's much. So I hope that answered the question. Mr. Sutton, you know where to find me if that wasn't a good answer. Send me an email. The next question I had is they wanted to know about comparisons, empirics between different countries, specifically the United States and Europe as a whole. Now, we do have a pro and con answer for this because, there are different pieces of evidence for everything. The con answer is actually part of the case I read earlier, essentially that drugs are less accessible in countries with price controls. The UK and Greece are both in Europe. They're having issues getting these drugs because they have price controls. So I would argue that that's the comparison. What do you think on that?
What was the original question exactly?
It was essentially, are there any good comparisons between Europe and the U.S. for price controls? And I know at face value, it's a tough question just because...
I just want to say no. Yeah. Empirically comparing the U.S. to any country, but maybe China from an industrial standpoint.
Yeah.
Is difficult just because the upbringings of the United States, the foundation of its economy, the way that our economy is regulated compared to other places. I mean, you have so much evidence that shows that it's not the same.
Right.
It's very easy to just say no. Like, the U.S. is so different in so many ways that you can't compare these two things. Plus, when you're using countries like Greece and the UK, well, the UK is part of the EU and so is Greece, but Greece's economy is in the crapper, but UK's isn't.
And I think I totally get what you're saying, and I really do agree. It's hard to compare these at all. But
so many variables.
If I was to force comparison, that's what I would say. Does that make sense? If I had to look at these side by side in the realm of price controls on pharmaceuticals, that's how I would answer it. Is that drugs are less accessible in these EU countries.
I have to wonder if patients with 2 or more chronic conditions skipping medication has a lot to do with the patient rather than the cost of the medication. What are you talking about? This card you just read. Citizens in the EU don't skip prescriptions because of cost.
Oh, well, you're on the pro answer, Lucas.
Oh, am I?
Yeah, that's right there.
Well, then,
I'm down here.
Why? I didn't know that.
Come on, man.
Well, your question's not even formatted the same way as the prior question was, so it's hard for me to tell what's going on.
I typed this up so fast.
It's okay. My apologies. Major cancer. Oh, see, I wasn't even reading the right card. Give me like 10 seconds, guys. Okay. Quentin's going to say something sweet.
Hey, guys. It's your boy Q. I'm so glad. If you're still listening, we're like an hour and a half into this. Thank you for being here. Thanks for sticking around. Even if you fell asleep.
Yeah, thank you so much. We hope that if you fell asleep, you're having a good rest.
Sweet dreams. This is now Debate ASMR.
This will never be Debate ASMR.
I'm going to give you guys a brief roadmap. You guys want to hear me write on my flow pad with my G2.
Okay. I understand now what the nature of the question was, as well as what he was saying. I was on the wrong page.
Do we agree now? Sort of, at least. A little bit closer.
It's still just... When you're talking about these kinds of things, it's so difficult to say anything for sure.
Oh, yeah.
There's just way too many variables involved. But yeah. I would say for the purpose of academic debate in the format that is given to us, yes, I agree.
Right. And so often in debate, you are forced to compare things that are incomparable.
Yeah.
You know, and that's kind of how I was doing it. I know that the EU not only is not a country, but it's a group of countries in a union in the United States, and they're set up so differently. But if I was to force comparison...
They're not even a group of countries in a union. They're a commonwealth. They literally only share economic ties. I think that there might be minor litigations involved over the top of it, like stuff to do with money, such as like banking and maybe transit.
Here's all I'm saying. They need to get it together.
It's not all
That's
of them.
too confusing.
You guys are doing a great job. Don't listen to Quentin. I happen to think...
No, I'm the king of Europe now.
I am the country boy, and I am the one who's right about all the countries.
They elected me. Merkel was like, dude, you're pretty tight. You want to run this? I was like, okay.
I would like to state that the president of Germany did not say that to Quentin Cooper.
She goes to a different school. You don't know her. So my pro answer to this, as Lucas read ahead earlier.
You might want to re-reference the question now that we've tangented away.
The Europe versus the United States, just sort of a compare contrast in the realm of price controls, if there is any. If I was on the pro side, I would bring up how citizens in the European Union, they don't skip out on prescriptions because of the cost. Now, if you remember, we did talk about through the case reads that a lot of U.S. citizens skip out on costs, which actually this different piece of evidence brings up. This is also Sarnik et al. Of the Commonwealth Fund 2017. I'll just read it. It says, 2016 survey found that in most countries, patients with 2 or more chronic conditions were significantly more likely to skip medications because of costs than were healthier patients, with 1/4 of chronically ill adults in the U.S. reporting such a problem. That's the card from earlier that we read, just a different source. Then it goes on to say, notably, the only countries where such patients were not significantly more likely to report cost barriers to prescription drugs were France, Germany, and the UK, countries that have instituted protections to reduce out-of-pocket charges for their chronically ill populations. So those are EU countries. with price controls, they're the only ones that didn't report this cost barrier problem.
I would say that the only thing that would be better to compare to the United States than Europe, or Western Europe even, because as you get into Eastern Europe, there's so many fundamental differences in our government styles that it's hard to relate them.
Oh, yeah.
I would look at Canada and Mexico. Canada and Mexico function rather similarly to us. Our economies are so integrated together at this point that it's a lot easier to make these kinds of arguments for comparison. So I would say, to answer the question, should you use Europe as a comparison tool with the United States on the topic about pharmaceutical price controls? I would say no. You should probably look towards North America, if possible, just because they're closer, they're more integrated economically with us. But I'm not an authority on this. You could probably find a card that words it right, and you could totally work it in. And this is a good example of countries without price controls versus with price controls, but it's still not the U.S., and that's what the topic's about.
And, through all of this, I know we've been talking a lot about arguments we're making, how to respond to those arguments, how to do clash, how to do framework. It's important to consider that there is no argument that cannot be beat.
That's true.
Every argument can be beat with something. You can use evidence against it. You can take down their source, create doubt within it, logic, theory, better evidence.
Because what's interesting about the nature of what makes something an argument is that if it can't be beat, it's a fact, and it's not an argument, and it's an observation, and you don't necessarily need to contest those.
Yeah, if you ever get into a round and you hear a card that you're like, I don't know how to beat that, I don't think I can, I promise you can. Because if it's an argument, like Lucas said, if it's an argument that can be beat, it's fact. And there's no point in trying to at that point. As much as we complain about some debate topics, they are written
like the next one.
Yeah, like the next one.
It's so recursive, it's not even funny.
We'll talk about that next week. As much as we complain about it, they are written in a way that debate is possible. And that's a simple fact.
We do have to give is it NFL or NSDA now?
It's now NSDA.
Is it still NSDA?
Yeah.
Okay.
Isn't
we do
that
have
wild?
to give the NSDA as well as MSHA credit for that. That even though some of these topics are recursive, even though some of these topics don't necessarily lend the best direct clash, they are all debatable and they are all relevant.
Right.
And that's a good thing. It's good for education.
So trust us, trust the NSDA. That argument is beatable. Whatever it is. Whatever argument you're thinking of right now that's like, oh, dude, you haven't heard this one. I promise you can.
Because whenever they make these topics, there are dozens of people involved with the making of the topics that are far more qualified than probably anybody any of us has ever met to make these topics. They have the exact same kind of discussion that we're having here right now, except at a much higher intellectual level. And they work through it in much the same way that we're attempting to help you guys work through it.
Right. There were a couple more questions that I wanted to get into.
What do we want to call our listeners? I don't like referring to them as you guys.
Dude, I was thinking about that. I don't know. Let's talk about it not on here.
The podcast?
Yeah.
Oh, that's no fun.
Because I'm going to be...
If you have an idea of what you think the listeners of the Former Partner podcast should be called, send it to us on our Twitter at Former Partners.
So Carthage High School came at us with a couple of questions. They wanted us to sort of...
Alma mater.
They wanted to bring up the argument of shortages and how that plays in. The idea is that when price controls are put into effect, there are shortages because the cost goes down to a level that everybody buys it, right? Here's what I would say, and this is what I've told everybody that's asked me this. I use the example of like car oil. Whenever I need an oil change, that's when I buy oil. If the price of oil for my car goes down, I'm not going to buy oil in bulk right then. And
Some people will.
Some people will, yeah.
But not enough probably to offset the market.
Right. And it's also just the fact that these companies understand economics.
And consumer demand. So they're aware of the fact that there's 325 million Americans, and they're aware of the fact that 25 million have conjunctivitis or whatever it's called. And they know that only this many are going to be able to afford it, or this many are actually going to seek treatment for it. So they try to make about that much medicine. They don't shortchange themselves.
And when the price drops on it, in the event that price controls are put into place, they know the demand will, even if it's just slightly, demand will go up, and they will but production on it. It's simple.
Well, I'd be willing to bet that at any given time, the amount of that medicine that's in distribution is probably already sufficient to treat everybody with the condition that it treats.
Yeah.
They just don't sell it all. It mostly sits in warehouses because people can't afford it.
Yeah. So that's what I would say. I would argue, one, you're not going to buy in bulk something. For one, you're not going to buy in bulk a drug that you don't take.
One, it's semantics, too.
Yeah.
But, yeah, you're not going to buy in bulk a drug you don't take. That's true.
If I don't have a heart condition, if the price of heart condition drugs drops, I'm not going to be like, oh God, I got to stock up. That's not how it works. Two, if you're on a prescription, you're not going to buy extra, even if you do take it, because the price drops.
You are on a 30-day regimen or a 60-day regimen.
You literally can't most of the time.
They will only allow you so many refills. This isn't a bad question, though, because I think this might have been more about concerns of shortages maybe in the materials required to produce the medication in the first place.
No, because there's tons of arguments about shortages on this topic.
And material?
Just in the availability of the drug.
It's, that may just be an unfortunate fact of life. There may be a disease where the thing that we discover that can treat it is in limited amount on Earth. Right. And we can only treat X amount of people, and the rest of them are going to get hurt and sick and die.
And that did happen a few years back. Do you remember with the flu vaccines?
Yes. When they gave out the wrong flu vaccine.
Yeah.
That was last year.
Was it last year?
Yeah. That was, dude, it sucked. I didn't get mine, and I'm glad because I almost got really sick otherwise.
Did you know we had an Olympics this year?
I know. And Tide Pods happened in January.
What?
Yeah.
No. That was like 2 years ago.
Tide Pods happened in January.
No.
Yeah, and Donald Trump's been president for 2 years already. Yeah, I know. It's like, what is time? We don't even know anymore.
Anyway, this year's been so long. Yeah, the flu vaccines, there was a shortage, but it's because I forget what it was. They messed something up. It wasn't about the price.
The primary strain of flu that was in circulation in the United States did not match the strain that was put into the vaccine for the most part. And so it was either ineffective or causing people to get more sick. And yeah, it was just a flub. They messed up, and people who got the flu shot sometimes suffered for it. It actually killed quite a few kids, if I remember, because their younger immune systems couldn't handle it.
Wow. Good stuff.
Yeah. But those, I don't know, that's a risk that's inherent to the nature of medicine, and that can only be solved with better screening, better testing. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the question, shortages.
Yeah. Another question that got asked, which I hope we answered that right. It's a pretty easy to understand answer about how economics works, supply and demand. If you have more questions, you know where to find me.
Yeah, if the company can make more of the medicine, regardless of a price drop, if people still want it and they can move units, they're going to make it.
Right.
If there is not more of the material on Earth available to make the medicine, obviously they can't make it, and there's nothing we can do about it. And that's pretty much the answer to your question.
They had another question. See, these guys, they get calendar briefs available at calendarbriefs@gmail.com.
Sounds like they must be pretty smart kids.
Oh, yeah. Good coaches, too. Great guys.
Is that Brian White?
Brian White, Whyte.
And Norman Carr?
Norman Big Daddy Carr.
Norman Big Daddy Carr, correct.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they're fantastic educators.
They got the brief, and they saw the argument that I put in about price controls actually being unconstitutional. And this is something I've wanted to talk to you about for a while. We haven't had a chance to sit down and talk this topic yet. Mm-hmm. So FPC versus Hope was a Supreme Court case. It was about the Federal Power Commission versus Hope Natural Gas, I believe. Mm-hmm. I can scroll to it while I'm talking.
Excellent.
The idea is that the Supreme Court decided in terms of price controls, I need to stop talking for a second and just find this card. Say something sweet.
If you're still listening at this point, we've almost hit the 2-hour mark. After editing, I can't tell you how long this podcast is going to be. I can't even tell you how long they're going to be regularly in the future. I just want you to know, I really appreciate you. You are valued.
Very sweet. Very nice. That's the kind of stuff they're looking for. Let's stop talking about debate. Let's just be sweet.
Just be really positive, affirming.
Yeah. Okay, so here it is. Anyway, cool with that. So FPC versus Hope Natural Gas, they decided that price controls are okay under 3 conditions. First, that the justification for the price regulation is justified, or that it's real, that whatever the reasoning is, it's legitimate. Second, that if it's a temporary or, indefinite price control, that the regulation is justified. Reasonable. Yeah. And the third, this is where the argument comes in, that the ability of a firm to withdraw from the regulated business, right? Ooh. So a firm's investment in specialized assets which cannot be easily converted to other uses can make exit from a price-controlled business or a market almost as infeasible as a legal service or obligation.
Is this what's keeping us on oil dependency, essentially?
It could be.
I feel like it is.
Because the idea is that they said price controls are okay as long as they can withdraw from the industry. And I would be willing to argue, obviously because I put it in the brief, that it's not easy to ask these pharmaceutical companies to either deal with the price controls or switch to a different industry. They have so many specialized assets.
Well, yeah, pill presses cost so much money in the first place.
What else are you going to do with that?
Yeah, there isn't anything else to do with it. I think they might be able to be converted to ammo benches, maybe. They allow you to reload bullets.
Wow.
If that's really where you want to go with your pharmaceutical company, straight from saving lives to taking lives.
You hear that, Pfizer?
There you go.
Oh, my God. Yeah, so that's the argument. There is an answer to it, which we can talk about in a second. What would you say to this? I can't tell you what I would say to it because I know what the block is.
3 factors play a predominant.
I'm gonna talk sweet while you. Hey guys, it's me. It's Quentin again. Like you said, we're about to hit the 2-hour mark. We did not think we'd make it this far. We were talking about it before we started recording. We were thinking maybe 30 or 45 minutes. I feel a little bad, but I'm also excited. Again, if you made it this far, right at the end of the podcast, we're gonna have a secret little code that you can use for $5 off the can of briefs if you want it, just for sticking around so long. Obviously, you don't have to buy it. If you can find it on Debate Trade, okay, whatever. But if you want to buy it from us so that we can do this more, we'll have a code for you right at the end. So stick around if you're interested.
It's hard to argue against something like a Supreme Court decision.
Right.
In terms of usability in a debate round, it's about as good as it gets.
Yeah. I'm proud of it, honestly.
It's a good one for sure. I would... Could you look up a definition of the word ability for me really quick?
Yeah.
As well as withdraw. Actually, if you look up ability, I'll look up withdraw.
Okay. Yeah, teamwork.
Yeah.
Are we talking like Black's Law definition?
Just give me a Merriam-Webster. I'm not too horribly worried about it. I just want to see if I have any legs to stand on with what I'm thinking about.
Ability is possessions of the means or skill to do something.
Possession. Okay, yeah, so this works exactly how I think it would. I would argue that due to the fact that pharmaceutical companies are, in fact, making like 99% profit on the product that they're moving, that because of the definition of ability, meaning means, they would have the ability to liquidate their assets and pull out of the industry if they decided not to continue to sell pharmaceuticals post a regulation on their prices.
Okay.
I think that Bayer, even if Bayer closed all of their factories today, stopped producing as many pills as they make every day today, they didn't do anything else. They fired everybody.
Yeah.
And just liquidated the business, that everybody who would get any of that money is going to come out with more money than they went in with.
Okay.
And I think that that's where the word ability and that would come into play. And if they have the means to liquidate their business and still make a profit, you could make them do it.
Yeah.
And this Supreme Court decision would not protect them.
Okay. I think that would be debatable. I think that is a good response.
Now, withdraw is to remove or take away from a particular place or position. There's not a whole lot I can do with that definition. The ability of a firm to withdraw.
I like what you said.
Yeah, the ability of a firm to withdraw from the regulated business is definitely the most important clause in the Supreme Court decision. And if you can prove that pharmaceutical companies would either be able to eat the cut and be fine still, or
I think the idea is
and stay out with some good money.
That this third factor means they are able to withdraw without loss, and while being able to stay open.
Well, and that's what I'm trying to say, is that ability is, in referring to means, it's literally quite, have they made enough money and can they sell enough of their stuff that they have on hand at the moment, that if we made them close their doors today and then liquidate, would they be able to come out with in the black? And
so I'm going to say, I think that's a good argument. I could beat it by saying the only way it's constitutional is if they don't have to do that stuff. You know,
what do you mean?
So, like, the Supreme Court said their ability or a firm's investment in specialized assets to be converted to other uses. I would say the only way it's constitutional based on this is that they don't have to liquidate. They can just change their LLC and industry to something else and bypass the price controls. Do you want to see the actual block? Oh, are we doing this now?
1 second.
He's got the look on his face. He's reading it hard right now. He's trying to find something unhighlighted. Is he going to? Place your votes now. I don't think he's going to find anything. I can see the gears running so hard.
This is mostly applied to utilities.
That's exactly what the block is.
That's a hard one. That is a hard and dirty argument to potentially have to get into. Right. Because then you're getting into, heart medication is not a necessity. Those people can just die.
Right. And
of their natural conditions.
And that's where I would start arguing, okay, then what is Supreme Court precedence? This is supposed to outline, if there's no other decisions ever made in this area, this one case is supposed to lay it out, you know?
And since it relates almost exclusively to utility rate making,
right? And
this isn't a utility company,
right? But it's the only case that talks about price regulations.
I still would say no.
Right.
I would come in and say that pharmaceutical companies are totally able to withdraw from the regulated business. I would probably even try to show examples of how most pharmaceutical companies are diversified, meaning that they don't just make pharmaceuticals. They also make like lotion. They also make health care products, like personal care products.
Yeah. And I would just bring up, even if they can,
should they have to?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, they should though.
and that's where the argument is. I just think that's a great argument. I love the debate that stems from that.
That's definitely a good Supreme Court case to have on hand for any sort of resolution related to government intervention and market.
Yep.
But yeah, do keep in mind that it's mostly relevant to utilities companies, and let me see. Self requirement not the only effective paradox. However, that looks like other conspiracy. So we have international economics. Like, we are extremely intertwined with other countries. Price regulations don't exist everywhere. If I'm the U.S. federal government and Bayer says, boo-hoo, I can't sell my pill presses to anybody in the U.S. now, I'm going to say sell them overseas. Yeah. Liquidate your company the same way that you move your product other places.
Right. But is that constitutional?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Because a service requirement is not only the effective... It outlines a lot of ways that it could be or could not be okay for you to essentially force a business to sell their product at a cheaper rate or to kick them out of the industry altogether.
Yeah.
And I really think that it's impossible to say without looking individually at each pharmaceutical company, how much money they make, how much overhead they have available to them every year, how many employees they have, what kind of impact. The impact calculus involved would take a team of 20 people with more qualifications than either of us have.
Well, we'll just both do it 10 times and see what happens.
I think it would take us too long. The amount of data required to be collected to be able to say for sure in regards to specifically pharmaceutical companies about this Supreme Court decision is almost infeasible. But I would say I don't think it applies for the most part.
Okay.
But I could see how you could make it try to apply, given that it is the only Supreme Court decision that applies specifically to price regulations. But man, if I'm the judge and you say, yeah, but this is only about utility companies and their rates, that's going to put it in a weird spot for me.
Yeah.
Because medical companies aren't treated like utility companies. They probably should be, but they're not.
Yeah.
And we're looking at the status quo, not what things ought to be.
Right. Yep. I love that argument.
Good times.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions?
Not really. There was one more thing I wanted to talk about.
Okay.
Not question related. This is something I saw on Reddit that I kind of feel obligated to bring up. So there's this academia study called Research and Development and Pharmaceutical Price Control's Long-Term View. The author is Dr. John Galt, who is a character from Atlas Shrugged. And the photo on the academia profile is a guy named Carl Denninger. Now, before I get deep into this article is the only study that I've been able to find that says exactly what Pro needs it to. It pretty much says, in a price control world, innovation increases. Which there's been no other study that I could find that said that. So it just starts out sounding too good to be true.
What's the date on it?
October 24th.
Of 2018?
Yep.
When did the topic come out?
October 1st. So the guy pictured, Carl Denninger, he used to do a podcast. It was pretty much Market Watch. He stopped doing his podcast 5 years ago, went completely off. He said he was done, like he's going incognito. Hasn't done anything since. His last episode was called Going John Galt, Disappearing. I'm pretty sure, and I don't want to say this for a fact. I don't want to start anything. This sounds sketchy. So we're not just going to say this is fake evidence made by somebody. Yeah, I have written here, not 100% saying it's fake, but sketchy.
Yeah. But you should take every single thing you read anywhere with a grain of salt, because it's secondhand information at the best, because you're not hearing it from the person who came up with it. That's right. It's a secondhand source at best, no matter what. So everything that you read online, in a book, in a newspaper, everywhere, grain of salt. When something sounds this good, it relates specifically to the debate topic. It came out right around the time the topic came out.
When
it came from a guy who was disappeared for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say it's fake. I can't say that for sure because I just don't know. I can't
say it either, but it sounds sketchy.
It does sound sketchy. And if something sounds sketchy, you should probably be careful of it.
Especially because the only citation in the article is the citation of John Galt that says, Professor of Economics at Carnegie Mellon University.
Okay.
On Carnegie Mellon University's faculty page, there is no John Galt. There is no Carl Denninger.
Do you think that it could be an outdated page?
No.
I don't feel like Carnegie would do that.
No.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
I feel like as soon as they hire somebody, they probably update their page.
If you've read a study like this on academia before, you know that for these kinds of things, they have all sorts of graphs. They have all sorts of data. All the pictures of the graphs in the study are stock photos of graphs. They're not labeled. It's literally a white box with a random arrow doing a certain thing, with no description really of what it means. It just sounds way too good to be true for a pro argument.
If you were John Galt or the person who wrote this study and you happen across this podcast, or if you happen to know anything about the nature of that study and its creation, feel free to contact us.
I tried emailing Carl Denninger to be like, hey, did you...
No response? Okay.
I mean, it was just a few days ago, but...
Excuse me. Yeah, it would just be good to know, because one of the worst things you can do is spread misinformation, and making a study like this that might just be a perfect pro argument faked into a study so that people can win more rounds. That's just spreading information. That's not good. You don't want that. You don't want to make people believe things that aren't true, unless you do, in which case you're probably a bad person.
Yeah, please don't do that.
So today's special discount code is going to be
Let's
GALT.
see. No. Is that too on the nose?
I
wanted to go with like Mr. Jingles, because I've been thinking about the Green Mile a lot.
How about we just do white?
No, what? Hey, no, we're not Nazis.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry to anybody that might have offended.
Let's go Green Mile. Let's say cornbread.
I like that. Today's discount code is cornbread. So if you're going to purchase the Candor Briefs next issue, which will be on which topic?
It'll be on the January topic. We do have 2 releases available for this pharmaceutical price control topic. The first release is $25 normally. It's a lot of case building evidence and blocks. The second release, what I do is I look at the community, look at what everybody else is running, what the staples are, and create a block file to that. The second release is $20. If you want both, I'll cut you a deal, especially with the cornbread discount code. So email me cornbread at candorbriefs@gmail.com. We'll discuss how you want to pay. And that's about it for ordering. It's pretty easy.
And for those of you folks that are very interested in what we're doing here with Candor Briefs, I don't want to say anything definitively yet. A lot of things are still in the works. But if you're into paperless debate and you're into using all of your electronic devices interchangeably, there may be some exciting software things to come in maybe the next 6 months to a year.
We're working on a lot of different things.
A lot of stuff, and the only way that we can work on it faster and maybe get cool things out to you guys quicker is if we get some of that support. Doesn't even have to be monetary. You can just share this podcast to everybody you know.
Yep. So this has been the Former Partners Podcast. If you liked what you heard, most evidence can be found in my Candor Briefs releases. Follow us on Twitter at Former Partners for updates, and tweet us if you have any questions. That's all for us. We wish you many flow judges and good RFDs. Until next time.
What's the email?
Which one?
That they should try and purchase from, as well as contact us for.
So we have formerpartners@gmail.com if you want to get a hold of us about the podcast. If you're interested in the brief, we have candorbriefs@gmail.com. And both of those Twitter handles
are the same.
At Candor Briefs and at Former Partners.
Excellent. Yes, that was Quentin, and I'm Lucas. I wish you the best of luck in all of your debate activities, and we will see you again next week.
Yeah, until next time, thanks, enjoy, and good luck.